The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, this Sunday, a BBC1 programme will profile 88-year-old farmer Alec Burrough, who still works full-time on his Devon farm along with his family. It comes at a time when the highest proportion of on-farm fatalities are amongst older men. So are older people working on the farm something to be celebrated? Is it key to their well-being? Or is it a health and safety risk to them and those working around them? Alec's son Jonathan now manages the 130-cow dairy business, and earlier I caught up with him.
I've learnt a lot from my dad when I was young. I grew up on a farm and I was surrounded by farmers and all the rest of it. So I learned a lot from Dad. But these days I run the farm, but Dad is just an indispensable team player and partner in all that. He comes up every day at about 7:45 in the morning, 7 days a week, and helps do the cleaning up and will help with the calves. And because he's so, he knows the farm better than me. He knows, things like drains and pipes and stuff which he put in 60 years ago, which occasionally might go wrong. He'll know exactly where they are and how to fix them. So he is just, an essential, part of our team.
So how do you manage your dad and health and safety?
Well, sometimes we have to point out to Dad that that's really not a good idea, and he's not quite as young as he thinks he is. There's certainly been occasions where I've come home and I've found Dad, up a ladder repairing some guttering, or stood on a bale, which is on the end of a bale fork, repairing some guttering. And he's like, "Dad, get down now." But I think there is a sort of, I think amongst older people, there is a sort of, well, this will be all right. And bear in mind that when they were young, health and safety wasn't such an issue. But it's interesting you say it's older males. I've had quite a few quite scary experiences visiting other farms where they've got lots of young staff and lots of flashy gear, which they can often drive. I've been in farmyards where you're there and you get out of the car and a telehandler comes whizzing past you with the boom way up in the air, or the spikes out at just sort of body height. And so I think there's risk wherever you go.
And in terms of his retirement, what he wants to do, he's living his dream retirement, presumably, because some people would be happy to have a retired life and play golf all day long. This is his retirement, presumably.
Definitely. And there's been times where, again, you sort of think, I think it's very important that you don't try to take stuff away from people. And I've sort of had to watch myself in that sense, because I sort of think, well, actually, Dad, it's a lot of work. You're doing, 30 hours a week. Maybe we should do this or that, which, get a robot scraper or something like that. Or, there's lots of things we could potentially do at a cost that would make Dad's life easier. But then you then turn it around and actually the reason Dad gets up in the morning and the reason Dad keeps going and putting one foot in front of the other is because he knows he's got to go up and do his job. And having a purpose is probably part of the reason he's still here.
I was going to say, presumably, it's a real core centre to his well-being, the fact that he is getting up and scraping the cows every morning.
Definitely. And exactly. So on one hand, you think, oh dear, Dad's working ever so hard for his age. But actually keeping physically active and just like keeping one foot in front of the other, being involved, talking about, selection of bulls and, various business decisions, and, it keeps his brain active as well as his body. In part because my mum died in 2016. That sort of idea of the retirement isn't quite what it was, because he doesn't really have, he hasn't got my mum to go to the beach with, if that makes sense. And so whilst he has a good set of friends and he sees them pretty regularly, although that was quite difficult during COVID for obvious reasons, his main time is spent with us on the farm. And
presumably the key to successfully continuing to integrate older relatives into a farm business is knowing, is having a good succession plan, knowing who's in charge and knowing whose role is what.
Yes. And I wouldn't say, I think there's inevitably occasionally friction, less so these days. But obviously, like I said, it's a case of me not trying to tell Dad too much what to do. And because Dad's very capable, I say you don't want to think, well, Dad shouldn't be doing this, so you try and stop him doing that. And it kind of, there's no point apart from my own sort of, age prejudice or slight over concern, if you see what I mean, that why he shouldn't do whatever he's doing. So we just let Dad do whatever he's able to, and Dad will quite happily say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going across that field unless you get some petrol for the quad bike and things like that. But I think it depends a lot on character as well. So Dad and I get on pretty well. We're quite a few years apart in age because he was 45 when I was born. I think he's found it fairly easy because I've sort of come into farming at a time when I didn't come back to the farm until he was in his mid-70s. And so he was already at a point where, getting on in years. I used to work as a surveyor, and I used to go onto farms, and you'd find the son was 60 and the dad was 80, and the dad still wrote all the checks, and the son couldn't write a check without asking the dad. And I don't think that's healthy. So, the problem with family businesses, not just farming, but family businesses, is that there's so much potential friction, and the personalities matter a lot.
That's Devon dairy farmer John Burrough.
So, Hugh, this is an interesting story. And when it sort of came across the desk at Farmers Weekly, we had a look at it. And it's a fine balance, isn't it? Between people's mental well-being, continuing at work and this kind of thing. And I guess keeping people safe on the farm. We know that accidents on farms often do involve older people.
Yeah, they do. And look, as you said yourself, and unfortunately, when we report the horrendous figures around farm accidents, the bulk of the fatalities at the moment, the trend is they are older and they are male. So when you see, so-and-so's very old and still farming, and you sort of think, crikey, is that, So yeah, there is issues around safety. There is issues around well-being. There's lots of issues at play here. I think on the safety thing, as we heard in the audio, they've obviously got it sussed. They know what his limits are. This guy's 88 and he's lived there all his life. He's going to want to do what he wants to do. But there are times when he needs to be told to get down that ladder and one thing and another. So if you've got that in place, I think, that covers it. As long as you've assessed the risk and you're not expecting the person to go out and, draft a load of cows on their own in a slippery cow pen and get trodden on. It's just common sense, isn't it? But I think the real thing that came home for me on this is really important for this guy. He's a widower, he's 88, he's worked on that farm all his life, and actually being able to go out and do the things he does every day, it's part of his life. It's part of his well-being, and hopefully he'll still be doing it when he's 98. But if you stopped him doing it now because he's 88 and deemed to be too old, I'd imagine it would be really bad for him. And it wouldn't just be bad for him mentally, physically, and lots of things. So his overall well-being would go down. So it is finding a good balance and knowing who does what when, knowing what the rules are, and making sure everyone runs within that context.
So I guess it's a case of him working because he enjoys it and because he wants to, and rather than because he has to.
Yeah, exactly. And John alluded to when his mother died, as he came back to run the farm with his dad, their mother sadly died back in 2016. And so the idea that his father would have gone off and sat on the beach with her and had a sort of golden retirement, and that just was stopped dead in the water. And that will be the case, I'm sure, for many older people. One or the other partners dies. So if they've got work to hang on to and they're lucky enough to have that and to have the health to do that, it's really important, and it's obviously really important to their well-being. But like I say, it's about making sure they do that safely and everyone knows what the rules are and who should be doing what, so there are no mishaps and no unnecessary risks as well.
So I guess part of getting the balance right is getting the succession right as well, the succession plan on the farm.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I suppose if you haven't got a succession plan in place and you have an older matriarch or patriarch, whichever it may be, who's effectively grunting and growling and clinging onto the checkbook and no one can do anything, that's clearly not a good vibe. It's not a good place to be for everyone involved. But if everyone's pretty relaxed and it's all moved on, then that's great, and it's different things for different people. Let's face it, the sign of successful succession for some people is happily knowing that their kids are running the farm business, carrying on the hard work that they put in for the previous 40, 50 years, and then either helping alongside them, as is the case here, or for some people, it's saying, no, I've done really well, I've made good money, and I'm going to leave the kids to it. and I'm going to go to enjoy myself. I'm going to travel. I'm going to go and sit on a beach in the Caribbean and play golf and do whatever. So it's having that in place, I think, because that really does change the vibe, doesn't it? Because if you've got that wrong and there's bitterness and there's anxiety and there's snapping people here left, right and centre, not a good place to be for anyone, let alone from the safety thing, from the psychological and everything with it. So get that right and then it all moves on nicely.
So fit the job around the person, not the person around the job. Hugh, when can we see this programme?
So Extraordinary Portraits, it's on BBC1 on Sunday evening at 6:30 p.m.